There's a lot of misanthropic advertising out there that tells you things that are half-truths or whole lies, that uses certain phrases to make something sound more virtuous than it really is. Shown here is an advertisement from a manufacturer of glasses frames featuring this material called cellulose acetate, which they claim is plant-based or plant-derived and based on plants. The fact that it has cellulose in it makes it sound like it is something that is naturally made. However, that may not actually be the case, and it may have nothing to do with the plants from which it is derived. A lot of this material is synthetically prepared and does not exist in nature on its own. To say that it is plant-based is then misleading and inaccurate. There are lots of plant-based materials. In fact, beef is plant-based because what do cows eat? They eat plants. So the notion that plant-based is more virtually superior or more virtuous is a misleading statement at best and used in general by the speaker to virtue signal as a way to say, I am better than you because I use things that are plant-based. This, as you will see, is completely a canard. Consider, if you will, this animation, which illustrates the formation of source rock and describes the deposition of organic waste, or at least the residues of organic waste, from the dying corpses of plants and animals that deposit on the bottom of seabeds. This is actually where hydrocarbons come from. People sort of forget that a lot of petroleum products are also plant-based. It's not a simple process. It's also not a rare process, but it is localized to places that were once, as this illustrates, covered by the sea. Over millions of years, other layers put themselves on top of this waste layer, which is shown here at the bottom, and in that waste layer, then chemical reactions under temperature and pressure will then decompose, in essence, the materials that are there, which have not been exposed to other organisms that usually are responsible for the decomposition of plant and animal remains. All that is left at the end of these geological processes are hydrocarbons, the gases and oils, and if they're not trapped by this impermeable layer shown here, they then simply escape into the atmosphere. And you can see this in certain places. I'm going to pause this for a second. Like Silver Reef in southern Utah, where there's a naturally fracked section of shale oil, or Red Rock, just to the west of Las Vegas, which is also naturally fracked rock, fracked by the earth, where this impermeable layer has been damaged, allowing then the hydrocarbons to simply escape. In fact, if you go up Pine Creek Canyon into the left fork of Pine Creek Canyon, and you go up far enough, you will actually find, mixed in with the water, a natural gas leak that is bubbling up from underneath in this source rock and then accumulates inside the water as a meniscus layer on the top and gives it that unique petroleum sheen. But in this illustration, we see the petroleum products, the hydrocarbons that everyone hates, and the plastic substances derived from them are also essentially plant-based. In class during lectures on organic chemistry, I frequently point out to students, even though this is not an original thought from me, that it is possible that plastic dinosaurs are made from real ones, or perhaps from the ferns that they are made. So again, to summarize this, we will look at these following slides here. The decomposing residues of plants, shown here, and animals in a sea or lake or ocean environment drop to the bottom. Those portions that are not degraded by the fungi and bacteria that are normally responsible for the degradation of all organic matter are then covered by other sedimentary layers. That's this sand here, and then I'm not sure what this is. Then plate tectonics takes over, shifts everything around, causes thrusts, and under this increased temperature and pressure, as these layers sink, shown here, and then get closer to the center of the Earth, the remaining portions of this decomposed organic matter become the oil and gas that we know of as crude petroleum. If it does not escape on its own to the surface, some of it is trapped below, as shown here, usually by water, in this impermeable layer, and eventually we could drill down and harvest that, which is how we do it. So the notion that plant-based is virtuous is not a way to say that plant-based materials are better. It's a way to say we are better because we have this substance that we claim is plant-based. Most people, when they think of petroleum distillation and purification, think only of the fractional distillation of petroleum in which these particular materials are derived and evolved from the petroleum based on the temperatures, pressures, and circumstances that are shown here. However, that is not all that comes from the petroleum. In fact, the road on which you drive is what's left over at the bottom of a barrel of crude oil when we are finished, shown here as the bitumen. There are other residues. They only want us to think about these materials that are then burned as fossil fuels. But there are other things distilled from petroleum that have to do with your life. As this particular video demonstrates, only 19.4 gallons out of a barrel of oil actually goes to gasoline, and other substances are actually derived that are common to your life from the rest of the barrel. It might surprise some people to find that bubble gum is made from crude oil. In class, I have had students make nylon stockings and nylon rope, because that's what panty liners are actually made from, is a nylon that is actually derived from petroleum, as is all other nylon-based product. Many cosmetics are also contain or are made from petroleum derivatives. For instance, this mentions paraffin wax, which is not the wax you think of. It is a wax based on its structure and not based on where it originates. Of course, in modernity, people have started criticizing Teflon and many other of these plastic coatings that we use to prevent our food from sticking, or plastic sheeting, plastic wrap, plastic ware, plastic storage containers for food, etc., etc. In fact, plastic products come from petroleum. People think that eating crayons is perfectly fine. Well, you might as well just eat that crude oil. Remember, crude oil is plant-based, so it must be good for you, right? Of course, there are all sorts of synthetic fabrics. Most of your non-wrinkle fabrics are also derived directly from petroleum products. This includes spandex, lycra, and other materials that almost every woman wears around in order to currently hide their physique. Many medications are derived from petroleum as well. Now, it's possible to make aspirin without using petroleum, but because there is so much benzene in petroleum, they start with benzene rather than extracting salicylic acid from willow bark and making that. If you want to do it that way, then you need to register for one of my classes where we will make it from willow bark. Many pieces of sporting equipment are also derived from petroleum. How else do you think they're so cheap? Many of the components are directly derived from plastic, as are your grandmother's dentures and the coloring pigments that are used by dentists to color teeth from the inside. Speaking of dentists, they also want us to rub petroleum derivatives on our teeth in order to clean them, which sort of makes sense because an organic solvent would definitely dissolve other organics on your teeth. If you look through the videos available on plastic, its history and its uses, what you will mostly find are critiques of it, or, if you're lucky, histories of how it became a part of our world. But in truth, if you really want to know how plastic became an important part of our world, it boils down to this. People wanted things to be cheap. People wanted things to be mass-produced. People wanted things. The computer that you're using, the phone in your pocket, some of the clothes on your body, the materials that may have been put into you as surgical replacements for parts in your body that have failed, all are derived from plastic. Plastic is not evil. In fact, plastic is plant-based. And if being plant-based makes you better, then a person who eats a plant-based diet, a vegan, a vegetarian, or a pescatarian, is no more virtuous than someone who uses plastic. I like to tell some of my students sometimes that I am a proxy vegan, that I only eat animals that only eat plants. And I do this because even pescatarians who eat fish sometimes forget that fish eat other animals. It's the whole premise behind fishing, is that we use insect lures to catch fish. The notion that doing things based on plants makes you better is a canard, because it ignores where some of the things that are vilified in our society actually originate, and that almost everything begins with plants. Without plants, there are no animals. Without plants, there is no petroleum. Without plants, there is no plastic. Without plants, there is no life at all. And so it doesn't make you any better than the next person that you're plant-based, because aren't we all?